I like doing things in different ways. Today I'm going to be showing you how to do holly, simple holly, like with the berries and the twig and berries situation. I'm going to show you how to do it in two separate ways, both of which can be used in your planner if done carefully, and they can be used for cards or for decorations or whatnot. But these are two simple ways that turn out very differently from each other. For either of these, you're going to want to start out with a pencil and you're going to want to sketch in a holly like situation, right? So circles are sucky. I don't care if I'm a little sloppy with this. I just drew a circle and then another circle, but I stopped it when you hit the holly, and then another, so I have three. Then coming out from that, I'm going to draw two curved lines to be the leaves, and then it's easier usually for me to turn the paper. Start, like if this is where the line enters, that's what she said, start a little further out, and what you do is you curve outwards to a point like that, and then you go outwards to a point again like that, and outwards to a point, and then outwards to a point. And then from there, you go outwards to a point, going back down, and so forth until you get to the bottom. Now, this can be a little awkward at first if you're not used to it, going outwards to a point, outwards to a point, outwards to a point. As a matter of fact, I still struggle with it sometimes. Luckily, though, nobody's going to judge you. And if they judge you, it doesn't matter anyway. We have this holly that we've drawn here, and we're going to draw the same holly a second time for the second way of doing it. As you can see, I'm not very good at this all the time. So we have two separate hollies. One of these we are going to paint in with just some cheap watercolors that I got on clearance from Target. And one of these we're going to color in. Now I'm using Spectrum Noir alcohol markers, which they're not the cheapest markers in the world, but they're not as expensive as some. You can use, but for this situation, you can also use Crayola markers, you can use colored pencils, you can use whatever you want to color it in. It's basically going to be a shading situation. I'm just using these because they'll go fast. The markers for one, and we're going to watercolor the other. Generally speaking, if you're going to be working with markers, you want to have the one that's slightly neater, just for the sake of argument. However, that's not necessarily what you need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this very simple. I am going to take my pencil and I am going to draw in a highlight, and you just follow the curve of the berries and draw like a curved triangle where it looks like the side of the berries to give yourself a guide as to where the highlight's going to be. To color this in, I'm using two reds, a lighter red and a darker red, but that are close together in color, and then two greens, same situation, a lighter green and a darker green that are close to the same color. So you want to go in with your lighter color first, and if you're using markers or you're using colored pencils or whatnot, just go in with your lighter color first and fill it in, not coloring in the highlight. And if you notice, I'm super sloppy about this, partly because I am doing this trying to get done quickly on camera, but also because, honestly, I don't give that much of a crap about perfectness. But that's just me. If you care, take a little extra time and don't, have it look as sucky or as, half-assed as mine does. This is just simple. A simple way to get simple holly done. I'm also showing you that I have, you can see some of the strokes I'm making, like here. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but they're there. And I said stroke, yeah. But when you're working with alcohol markers, if you color over with the same color more than once, then the strokes are going to show up more. That's one way to add shading with alcohol markers, is to color over the same strokes with the same color to darken it just slightly. And I'm so sloppy up in this business. Gross, Cindy. Gross. You can do that, and I'll demonstrate. I can do this and see how I'm drawing lines to kind of go to the points of the holly, but it's the same color. It shows a little bit of a shadow. Now, if you don't have an alcohol marker, doing this is not necessarily going to work as easily. That's why I'm showing with the darker color. So what I'm going to do with the darker color is I am going to go in and I am going to outline with the darker color It's okay if it's a little sloppy. And then I'm just going to pull lines to kind of go towards the points of the holly to kind of give it a little bit more of a leaf-like look. This is very simple, like I said, and you can do the same thing with colored pencils. If you know shading, you can always add a lot more shading to it, but this, for the sake of expediency and simplicity, I'm going to use the same thing with the darker red, except I use the darker red. Whoops! I made a boo-boo and used the darker red for the first color, so I'm going to go with this Copic marker. I'm going to go with this Copic marker and do the same thing for the red. This is not the color I had meant for it to be, but these sounds are lovely. That's just going to be the way it is. And if you want, you can even, on the opposite side of the highlight, you can even like shadow the berries a little bit more to give them some depth. And that is one way to do holly. This is the slightly neater looking way. Trust me, if you take your time, you can do this. It'll turn out a lot neater. The same kind of shadowing principles if you're using colored pencils. The other way to do this is using cheap watercolors. You can use, again, you can use expensive watercolors. You don't have to use cheap watercolors, but I'm using cheap watercolors just to show that it is possible with cheap watercolors. So you'll need clean water, dirty water, and a brush and your watercolors. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some of my water and I'm gonna wake up the green. Now what you're gonna have to do is you're gonna have to do this in parts. Every time you paint something that's touching each other, like these berries or the berries to the leaf, if the water's not dry, the color is gonna hella bleed into it. Unless you want that effect, you're gonna have to paint in session. So if you're doing this for like cards or something, I would suggest doing a whole bunch of them at the same time and just working like an assembly line, each doing one part. Then by the time you get to the last one, hopefully it'll have, dried up, etc. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the clean water and I am filling in a leaf with clean water. If you watched my place card tutorial, it'll give you kind of an idea of what I'm about to do. So I go to my green that I woke up already and I'm going to tap it into the green water, just sort of following the edges. But note that the paint is going where the water is. It's going to be uneven. It's not going to be perfect. And that's kind of the way I like this style. The biggest issue you have to remember is don't mix up your clean water and your dirty water. Otherwise, you could, but things will start turning into mud very quickly. So I'm just sort of tapping the green in, letting it follow the water. If there's not enough water, if it feels like you missed a spot with water, go tap in some water. And you can even tap in a little bit more green if it's not going as many places as you'd like it to. And it'll start to green. Now, while it's still wet, one of the things I like to do to add a little bit of dimension is to take, if you're using the cheap watercolors, is tap a tiny bit of blue onto your brush. Then go to the base of the leaf where it would meet the holly berries. And kind of tap some blue in very gently. You don't want it to be too blue, or you can if you want to. This is watercolors. There's no rules, except for that the paint goes where the water is. That's the main rule. And just sort of tap some blue in towards the bottom to turn it into kind of a shadowed area, right? For dimension. Now the idea of this is when it dries, it's gonna dry with a really cool like watercolor effect, but it's not going to be super neat. So you have to like resign yourself to that. So then just repeat the same process for your other leaf. Side note, for this I'm using cardstock, which is why it's getting a little bit warped looking. If you have a watercolor thing that you did on cardstock, assuming the paper didn't pill up, because you can do work on cardstock, you just have to be careful with how much water you're using. If it starts to pill up, you're kind of screwed. But if it doesn't pill up, if it's just warping and bending, when it's dry completely, put it between some thick books. And that'll help like flatten it out. You set that side to dry, and if you're working on a bunch more, then you just keep going until it's dry. Once I've done some ahead of time to show you what to do. Once it's dry, here's a version of it that's dry. Now you have the holly berries. Now to do the holly berries, you're going to have to work one berry at a time. Otherwise, they're going to bleed into each other. They're going to bleed into each other regardless, but to minimize it, one berry at a time. So what I'm doing is I'm putting clean water down on the berry, one berry, clean water. And I'm going to wake my red up with some water. And I'm going to tap that in, but I'm going to follow the side of the berry that I want to be the shadowed side. That's where I'm going to tap in the majority of my red. I'm going to tap it all the way around and everything, but it's going to be, the majority of the color is going to be tapped in. See how I'm doing this in like a crescent, kind of following where I want the shadow to be? Imagine that the light's coming this way, okay? And that this is going to be where the highlight is. So just tap in some color until you feel like you have a good amount. And then if you want to do the same thing like what we did with the leaves and add a little bit of shadow, what I'll do is I'll take a tiny bit of purple, just a tiniest bit of purple, and tap it in on the very edge of where you want the shadow to be. Just a little bit, just to add a little color difference. So what you do is you paint in your berry, and then once it's dry, you go and you paint in all of your berries. It's like with here, you would add the shadow in this area or the shadow here, okay? So that's how you get the berry in. This is what it would look like once they're done, and notice it bled in a little bit. Now, to give it like a cool kind of scribbly finished look, I'm grabbing a Pigma Micron because they're waterproof. Like you don't have to because they'll be dry at this point, but it's your call. And I'm going to go back in and I'm going to kind of sketch in lightly. Maybe even add in a little suggestion of where a highlight might be. This one really bled though. As you can see, I was not patient when I was doing this. But you just sketch in and doesn't have to line up perfectly. That's why this is like sloppy. You just sketch in your holly blossoms. Now note, in this one, I use too much purple. Down here on the bottom, as you can see. Should just let you know. Less purple for everybody. But it gives you the same like scribbled in holly look. Two different versions of holly done in two different ways, but they both kind of do separate effects for each other. If you have any questions or want to see anything else with having to do with the holly, let me know in the comments. I'm going to be using this tutorial to show you how to do some holiday cards tomorrow. So look for that video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will catch you next time.